It started like any other Tuesday evening. Richard sat in his study, flipping through the old leather-bound journal he'd found in his late father's attic. Dust tickled his nose. The pages smelled of damp wood and forgotten memories. A chill lingered in the air as the sun dipped below the horizon. The journal was dated 1924, written in a shaky hand he recognized from old photographs, his grandfather's. The first few entries were mundane: crop failures, his grandfather's complaints about his aching back. But then, Richard stumbled upon an odd passage. "The clock in the cellar whispers to me again. It ticks when it shouldn't. Time bends in that room." Richard frowned, glancing at the old grandfather clock standing stoic in the corner of his study. His father never spoke of such a clock in the cellar. Curiosity flickered. Sleep came late that night. Richard stared at the ceiling, unable to shake off the peculiar entry. Was it dementia? Or something else? He drifted into restless dreams where walls bled old clock faces and disembodied whispers beckoned him downward. The next morning, Richard found himself drawn to the cellar door. He wasn't superstitious, yet something about that passage gnawed at his mind. Slowly, he descended the creaking wooden stairs. The air grew colder, damp with the scent of earth. He scanned the dark corners until his eyes landed on a shrouded object, an old clock, partially covered in a tattered sheet. His breath caught as he pulled the fabric away. The clock was ornate, its brass face tarnished, but the hands, they moved backward, ticking steadily. A wave of unease swept through him. He reached out hesitantly, fingertips grazing the cool metal. A faint whisper brushed past his ear, so soft he almost believed he imagined it. Turn it back. Inspecting the mechanism, he found unfamiliar markings, symbols unlike anything he'd seen. More Latin than English, but not quite either. He backed away, senses on edge. "Some family heirloom," he muttered, though his gut screamed otherwise. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. Shadows seemed to stretch longer. The walls of his room creaked like unseen hands pushing against them. His dreams twisted with images of his grandfather, eyes hollow, standing beside the clock. "We all have debts, Richard," the apparition whispered. "Time takes its due." Richard woke, gasping for air, drenched in cold sweat. Dawn was hours away, but he couldn't stay in bed. He needed answers. He pulled the journal from his desk and kept reading. Entry after entry spiraled into madness. His grandfather had been hearing voices, losing time, waking up with no memory of the night before. "The clock knows," the final entry read. "It offers, but always takes more." Unable to resist, Richard returned to the cellar. The ticking grew louder the closer he got. He stood before the clock, his reflection distorted in the glass. "What do you want from me?" he whispered. The air shifted, and for the briefest moment, he felt another presence behind him, breathing down his neck. Without thinking, Richard twisted the brass dial at the base of the clock. The hands began to spin wildly, the room groaning as if the house itself protested. When the motion stopped, everything fell silent. Too silent. He climbed back upstairs, only to find the world outside frozen. A bird hung mid-flight, leaves suspended in the air. Richard stumbled back, heart hammering in his chest. Panic clawed at his throat. "Is this real?" he whispered to himself, his voice unnaturally loud in the eerie stillness. The clock's chime echoed faintly, though it was too far away to hear. A voice answered, not his own. You turned it back, Richard. Time is yours. For now. His mind raced. What did it mean? He tried the front door, but it wouldn't budge. Windows were painted with a dull grey light that revealed nothing beyond. He was trapped in a moment, a prisoner of his own curiosity. "What do you want from me?" he shouted again. The voice came clearer now. Balance must be paid. Suddenly, the images flooded his mind. His grandfather, his father, each man aging rapidly, their lives shortened as payment. Richard stumbled, clutching his head. No, this isn't fair," he gasped. "I didn't know. But you touched it. You woke me." The voice was feminine now, almost gentle but laced with cruel amusement. "The clock waits for blood, Richard. Always has." He could almost see her now, a pale woman draped in shadows, eyes black as ink, watching from the corner of the room. She moved closer, hovering. Every generation thinks they're the first to find it, but no, you've always been part of it. Desperation set in. He raced back to the cellar, determined to undo whatever he'd done. "If I turn it forward, maybe it will fix this." His hands shook as he gripped the dial again. The moment he turned it, pain shot through his chest, dropping him to his knees. Memories not his own flashed behind his eyes, wars he'd never fought, lovers he'd never kissed, children he'd never held. He was living entire lifetimes in seconds, each one aging him, stealing from him. His hands withered, skin cracking like old parchment. The clock fed greedily. He could feel his body breaking. "Stop!" he screamed, but his voice was weak now. The pale woman emerged fully, smiling. "You were warned, all of us were, but you humans, you can't resist touching the forbidden." She knelt beside him, cold fingers trailing his sunken cheek. "What are you?" he croaked. "I am time, or what's left of it. I am hunger." She leaned closer. "And now, so are you." Richard's last thought was of his father's warnings, the silence around the clock. But no one ever truly warned him, did they? The journal wasn't a warning. It was a trap, a lure. As his body crumbled, his soul was pulled into the clock, another whisper in its endless ticking. Outside, time resumed. The bird flew on, leaves danced in the wind. The house stood silent, except for the faint ticking from the cellar, where the clock waited for its next curious soul. The air was still in the small town of Woodvale that Sunday morning. Everything felt ordinary, as it always did. Daniel Morris, a 45-year-old watch repairman, wiped his hands clean and pushed open the door of his modest shop. The faint chime of the bell overhead echoed in the empty street. His shop, Morris Timepieces, had been in the family for 3 generations, passed down from father to son. Daniel often wondered if it were pride or obligation that kept him running it. Lately it felt heavier, like time itself was weighing him down. That morning, a peculiar visitor arrived. An old man, dressed in a dark wool coat, eyes sunken but intense, entered quietly. He placed a small antique pocket watch on the counter. "I need this fixed," the man croaked. Daniel examined the piece. The craftsmanship was unlike anything he'd seen. Intricate engravings of celestial bodies and faint inscriptions in Latin around the edges. "Where did you get this?" Daniel asked. The old man only smiled faintly. "It keeps the wrong kind of time." Before Daniel could question further, the man turned and disappeared into the misty street, swallowed by the fog. Daniel worked on the watch late into the night. The gears were unlike any he'd repaired before. Delicate, unnaturally light, and cold to the touch. Each time he attempted to realign the mechanism, the hands would spin backward on their own, faster and faster, until Daniel was forced to slam the cover shut. He couldn't explain the unease building in his gut, a gnawing dread creeping up his spine. That night, sleep avoided him. Each time he closed his eyes, he dreamed of the same clock face, its hands twisting unnaturally, ticking louder and louder until it became deafening. He awoke gasping, drenched in sweat, the sound of ticking still echoing in his ears. The room felt colder than it should have, as if time itself had shifted slightly out of place. Shadows in the corners stretched unnaturally long, and the night outside seemed endless. The following day, Daniel tried to find the old man, but no one in town knew him. It was as if the stranger had never existed. Feeling the growing need to understand the watch, Daniel began translating the Latin inscriptions. The words chilled him to the bone. Tempus edax rerum. Time, the devourer of all things. The watch began affecting Daniel's days. He'd lose hours, waking up in unfamiliar places or finding the sky dark far earlier than it should be. One evening, he stared at the watch in horror as the second hand paused, reversed, and then shot forward. The world outside his window flickered like an old film reel, his reflection staring back at him, but slightly out of sync. His hands trembled. The sound of ticking followed him everywhere, inside his mind, inside his dreams. His isolation grew. Daniel stopped taking customers, stopped answering calls. He couldn't explain what was happening, nor did he want to. His skin grew pale, eyes sunken, much like the old man who left the cursed watch. In desperation, Daniel visited Father Reynolds, the town's priest. Shaking, he placed the watch on the church pew. "It's changing me, changing everything." The priest examined the watch cautiously, his face paling. "Some things aren't meant to be fixed," he whispered. "This is no ordinary timepiece. This is a vessel." Father Reynolds refused to touch it again. "Destroy it, Daniel, before it finishes what it started." But Daniel could see fear in the priest's eyes. Not just fear of the watch, but of what it meant. Destroying it was not simple. Daniel tried smashing it with a hammer, metal against metal, but the watch remained pristine. He drove outside town, buried it deep in the woods, but when he returned home, it was there, waiting on his workbench, ticking softly. Time warped further. He'd find himself standing in the street, unsure how he got there. He'd hear voices, his late father's, his mother's, calling him from the watch. Days blended together. Time was no longer linear. He was living moments out of order, laughing with his wife, who had died 10 years ago, then seconds later, weeping alone in his workshop. Memories he had long buried surfaced. Regrets, mistakes, moments of shame. The watch forced him to relive them all. The town noticed his decline. Murmurs of madness spread. Daniel's gaunt frame haunted the streets at odd hours, mumbling to himself. One stormy night, Daniel locked himself inside the shop, determined to face it. He stared at the watch until it pulled him in. Memories, regrets, moments he'd long buried all surfaced. The watch showed him every mistake, every wasted second. "Time owns you now," a voice whispered from within the gears. Daniel realized the truth. It wasn't just showing time, it was feeding on it. Every second he spent trying to fix it, Every memory it dredged up, it consumed a part of him. He could feel himself fading, becoming less real, less tethered to the world. Daniel made a final choice. With trembling hands, he wound the watch backward, faster and faster. The world blurred. He was back in his childhood home, his mother baking, his father smiling. For a fleeting moment, he felt peace. Then darkness. The next morning, the townspeople found the shop empty. Dust covered everything. The watch sat quietly on the counter, ticking. Daniel Morris was gone, never seen again, but anyone who dared touch the watch swore they heard ticking follow them, and whispers of the past calling their name. Years passed, and the shop remained abandoned. No one dared enter. Until one day, a young traveller, curious and skeptical, broke the lock and stepped inside. Dust hung thick in the air, yet the watch gleamed as if untouched by time. He reached out, and the moment his fingers brushed the metal, his surroundings shifted. Memories not his own flooded his mind. A woman crying, a man screaming, time folding in on itself. The traveller staggered back, but it was too late. The ticking grew louder, wrapping around his senses, drowning him in moments he'd never lived. The clock was hungry again, and so the curse continued. In Woodvale, time belonged to the watch, and it was always hungry. It was almost midnight when David Callahan pulled his car into the nearly empty parking lot of an old antique shop on the edge of town. The sign, faded and barely illuminated by a flickering streetlight, read "Timeless Treasures." Rain tapped steadily against the windshield, turning the glass into a shifting liquid mirror. David sat still for a moment, staring at his own reflection, distorted by the water. Something gnawed at his gut, a strange unease he couldn't explain. He wasn't the superstitious type, but tonight, something felt off. He had no reason to be there. The plan had been a quick drive to clear his head after another bitter argument with Rachel. Marriage, he thought, had aged him more than the years themselves. The shop wasn't even open, but the dim light inside called to him, out of place, out of time. Almost against his own will, he stepped out of the car and approached the door, the bells above it jingling softly as he pushed it open. The smell of old wood, dust, and something metallic greeted him. From somewhere deeper inside, a frail voice called out, "Looking for something? Or running from it?" David flinched. The voice belonged to an old man, nearly skeletal, dressed in a black waistcoat that seemed older than the building itself. "Sorry, I didn't mean to intrude," David muttered, half turning to leave. But the old man smiled, the corners of his mouth twitching unnaturally. "No intrusion. You've come looking for something you lost. Or perhaps something you never had." There was a gravity in the old man's words that pinned David in place. He cleared his throat. "I was just driving, saw the lights." His voice felt small in the vast, cluttered space. The old man shuffled forward, his fingers tracing the spines of ancient books and rusted trinkets. "Time, sir," he said softly. "Time brings us all here eventually." Before David could respond, the old man gestured toward the back of the shop, where a single item sat on a pedestal covered by a thin cloth. "Perhaps what you seek. Is there?" David hesitated, every muscle urging him to leave. But curiosity, that cursed human flaw, pulled him forward. With trembling hands, he lifted the cloth. Beneath it rested a pocket watch, its silver surface gleaming unnaturally in the dim light. Strange symbols, almost runic, were carved along its edges. David felt a chill race down his spine. "How much?" he heard himself ask. "It's not for sale," the old man whispered. "It finds its owner, not the other way around." David should have walked away. Every logical part of his mind screamed at him to leave the cursed object where it was. But instead, he reached out, his fingers brushing the cold metal. A sharp jolt shot through his hand, and for a heartbeat, the world around him flickered. Images flashed. Rachel crying, his father's funeral, moments of his life he thought long buried. Gasping, David yanked his hand back. "What the hell is this?" he whispered. The old man smiled, eyes gleaming. "Time. Yours. Trapped. Wasted. Regretted. It remembers everything you forgot." "I don't want it," David muttered. "Take it back." But the old man only shook his head. "It's yours now. It answered your heart's deepest desire. Haven't you ever wished for a second chance?" The words burrowed deep. Of course he had. Every argument with Rachel, every lost moment with his father, every regret. The old man placed a watch in David's palm. "It doesn't run forward, only backward. Use it wisely." David staggered back toward his car, the watch burning in his pocket. The rain had stopped. The streets were empty. And for the first time in years, he felt truly, horribly alone. David didn't sleep that night. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the watch resting on his nightstand. Rachel was asleep, her back turned to him, unaware of the storm building within him. The old man's words echoed in his head. "It doesn't run forward, only backward." With trembling fingers, he wound the watch. The air thickened instantly. A strange hum vibrated through the room, and suddenly, everything shifted. David blinked. He was no longer in his bedroom. He was standing in the hospital hallway, the sterile smell filling his nostrils. The clock on the wall read the date of his father's death. David gasped, his eyes welling up. He sprinted down the hall, pushing past people who didn't seem to see him. There he was, his father alive, weak but smiling faintly from the hospital bed. "Dad," David choked. But the moment he reached out, his hand passed through the man like mist. He couldn't touch him. A cold realization hit him. He was only a visitor, a ghost in his own past. He could watch, but he couldn't change a thing. He fell to his knees sobbing, feeling the weight of years of regret crushing him. When David opened his eyes, he was back in his bedroom. The watch sat on the nightstand, its ticking loud, mocking. His heart pounded, his shirt soaked in sweat. Rachel stirred beside him but didn't wake. Desperation clawed at him. If he couldn't change the past, then what good was this cursed thing? Still, he couldn't stop. Next, he wound it again, and this time, he found himself back in the kitchen 5 years earlier. Rachel smiling, younger, still in love. Their laughter echoed in the air. David watched helplessly as his past self barked at her over some trivial thing. He saw the pain flash across her face. "Stop!" he screamed. "Please, just stop!" But it was no use. The moment played out exactly as it had before. No changes, no redemption. Back in the present, David collapsed. His heart ached. His soul felt raw. The watch was a curse, forcing him to relive his worst moments, powerless to change them. Days passed, but David wasn't really there. He became a shell, lost in the past, disappearing more with each turn of the watch. Rachel tried to reach him, but he was beyond saving. He barely spoke, barely ate. Only the watch mattered now. One night, Rachel found him staring at it, mumbling. "You have to stop," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You're not here anymore." David looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. It's too late. The next morning, Rachel woke up to an empty bed. David was gone. No note, no goodbye. Only the pocket watch left on the nightstand, its hands spinning wildly, faster than the eye could follow. She grabbed it, screaming his name, but deep down, she knew. David was lost, somewhere in time, chasing ghosts, trapped in regrets that had consumed him. Rachel collapsed, clutching the watch to her chest, sobbing. Outside, the sky turned grey, and the world felt colder. Time had won.